Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which I will flip in here. And he's like, hey Jason, could you talk a little bit about deloads, of like how to actually structure and program a deload for the most benefits? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling on my crafting a bit, and let's talk about this. Actually, I think deloads are pretty straightforward. There's a few different methods that people use out there, but I think simpler is generally better when you understand why you do a deload. Now, some people are going to say, why do you do a deload? What's the point? What is a deload? Deloading means you significantly reduce the workload on your exercises for a few days or a week, but obviously more than one workout. And the whole reason people need to do that for recovery reasons, meaning it's possible to exceed, particularly over several workouts or several weeks or sometimes several months, to train harder than your body can recover from. Now, the upside to that is that as long as you don't take it too far, you can actually adapt and grow and make changes to your body from reaching a state of overreaching that you can't recover from. As long as it doesn't reach full-blown overtraining, if you allow your body to do so, it will eventually play catch-up. And that's one of the things that's done with a lot of professional athletes, the things that's done with a lot of elite-level athletes, is to actually push beyond what you can recover from, and then back down and stimulate just enough adaptation to keep your body adapting, but to allow it to recover very quickly and maximize on all of that previous training that you had done. Because believe it or not, that cumulative effect will sometimes go ahead and catch up weeks after the fact. And that's the beauty of it if you time it right. And so the whole purpose of a deload is when you've reached a point to where your body cannot recover anymore and you're riding that bleeding edge of where if you push much harder, you're going to go ahead and overtrain and you're going to regress and lose muscle, lose strength, have problems, potential health problems, everything else. By deloading, you come in and rather than take time off, you allow your body to recover because you're not pushing it that hard, but at the same time, you are still stimulating muscles and you're still stimulating motor patterns so that you don't lose the edge that you have. In other words, whether you're talking about throwing a baseball or bench pressing a bar, there's a movement pattern involved. And if you just completely quit doing a movement pattern for a couple of weeks, what happens? It's going to regress. It's going to stagnate. You're going to lose part of the skill. But you could come in and not throw a baseball as hard, and you'll retain the motor pattern, right? Same thing with a bench press, because there's a movement pattern involved. And the other thing is that you need to keep muscle protein synthesis elevated from training to allow the muscle to continue growing a little better. So deloading is actually a lot better than taking time off. But you need to deload so much that your body recovers pretty much as it would as if you had taken time off. So how do you do that? You need to just cut your load dramatically. And when I say cut the load, I'm talking you need to reduce the weight that you're using by as much as 50%. Now, in some cases, 30% will be enough. So in other words, if you're using 200 pounds on an exercise for your work sets, if you cut it 50%, that would be 100 pounds. You cut it in half, right? That's pretty easy. That's easy math to do. Or if you cut it only 30%, you would take 60 pounds off, right? 30% of 260, so about 140. So if you reduce the weight from 200 pounds for your work sets down to anywhere between 100, 140 pounds, that's really easy, right? I mean, if you've been doing 5 or 8 reps with 200 pounds on an exercise and that's relatively challenging, and you drop that all the way down to 100 or 140, that's nothing. You could do that every day probably and not even get tired from it, right? Because it's roughly a half to 2/3 of what you normally lift. It's easy. It won't tax your recovery significantly. It will be very, very easy to do. But if you do a little bit of workload with it, you're still training the motor pattern. So let's say we're talking about the bench press. Let's say you've been doing 3 sets of 8 with 200 pounds on the bench press, right? And you drop it down to 100 to 140 pounds, somewhere in that range. And instead of doing 3 sets, you do 2 sets of 8. So again, you cut volume and you cut workload. Well, if you come in and you do, let's just start the number 120 then, because it's evenly between those two ranges. If you've been doing 3 sets of 8 with 200 pounds on the bench press, and you came in and did 2 sets of 8, that's still 16 reps with 120 pounds. You're going to recover from that like it's nothing. It's going to be probably the easiest workout you've ever done. You're going to be like, wow, I feel like I didn't even work out. And your body's going to recover accordingly. Your body's barely going to think you worked out. So if your body barely thinks that you worked out, and it recovers very, very easily from this, then you're not going to tax your recovery. But what you are doing, you still did 16 reps on the bench press, didn't you? Didn't that train the movement pattern, the motor pattern? Of course it did. Of course it did. Because you ended up doing 16 reps, did it still get some blood flow to the muscles? You think it still caused just a little bit of tissue protein disruption, some little cleaving of the proteins inside the muscle? A little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit. Isn't that enough to get some extra nutrients to the muscle to help them grow, help them recover, so that they can go ahead and adapt from the previous weeks of training? Of course it will. Let you get bigger. It'll let you get stronger. It will let you recover and play catch up from those more serious workouts that were starting to drive you into the ground. Same thing, what if your tendons in your elbows have started to hurt? You know, they started to get inflamed and everything, but you dropped from 200 pounds down to 120 or 100. And you're focusing on good technique that doesn't stress the tendons as much, and you come in and just do clean technique with that light weight for a week. It's going to happen. Those tendons will oftentimes start recovering also. That inflammation will go down. They'll start healing. But you still got blood flow to the muscles. You still trained the movement patterns, so that you maintained your ability to do the movement correctly. That's how you deload. Now, a lot of people say, well, which exercises should you keep? Any compound that's really important to you. Now, people say, well, what about my curls and stuff? Why do you care about curls? There's no movement pattern involved. And you know what? Doesn't barbell rows or your pull-ups or whatever else that you've been doing, your big compound movements, doesn't that work the biceps? Yeah. Now, you could argue that your rows aren't going to stimulate the biceps quite as much as a curl will. But do you need it to be stimulated as much as a curl? If you've been doing tons of weighted chin-ups, rows, curls, and everything going into a deloading phase, you've already stimulated the muscle. You've already stimulated adaptation with overload, with workload. When you're deloading, you're not trying to overload a muscle. You're not trying to push it beyond its limits. You've already done that. That's why you're having to deload. So you shouldn't have to care about that. So the fact that you're doing anything with it, even the barbell rows, should be sufficient to keep getting blood flow and a little bit of stimulation in the bicep to help it with the recovery process. You're growing based upon all those other sets of curls and chin-ups you've been doing for the last few weeks. If you're needing to deload, you've pushed beyond. You've already stimulated the muscle growth. You don't need to come in and stimulate the muscle growth and say, man, I need to make sure this muscle gets worked maximally. I better isolate it. There's no need for that. Not going to benefit you at all. There's no point. Do your big heavy movements. All the exercises that have multiple joints and a movement pattern involved that you need to learn. Because there's no skill to a curl. There's no skill to that. But there's a skill to a row because you've got multiple joints that move at different times through the movement. There's a motor unit component to it that's a lot stronger. You need to maintain that. You don't need to worry about a curl. You'll get enough blood flow and everything else to those biceps or whatever other muscle we're talking about from the bigger compound movement, from the rows. So what I would tell the people, don't worry about any of your isolation movements. Don't worry about accessory exercises that you don't do regularly. Meaning if you have an accessory lift that you don't do every single week, I wouldn't bother with it either. Why? Because it's not an exercise that you do every week to maintain the neuromuscular efficiency of it. It's something that you do to build muscle randomly and work on a weak point every now and then. All the weak point training that you've already done from the previous overreaching and pushing beyond has already stimulated those areas. You don't need to worry about it. They'll recover during the deloading grow. You just need to focus up on getting some blood flow to all the muscles. And if you pick 3, 4, 5 big heavy compounds that you do normally, that'll give the blood flow and the stimulation and the extra nutrients and everything that you need to all those muscles that you've been training, right? That'll handle it. Some rows, some squats, some bench press, overhead press, whatever it is that you do. I'm not telling you what to do. Obviously, you guys have different exercises you do depending on your goals. Come in and do your big basic movements. That will stimulate every muscle in your body. It will get a little blood flow going to them, a little bit of pump to them, a little bit of extra, clearing of waste products. That's all you care about with the deload. And you'll train the movement patterns of the exercises that do have a bigger performance element that you need to maintain. Don't worry about the other stuff unless it's an exercise that you do every single week and it's a compound movement. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the isolation movement. Don't worry about your one-off accessories that you do once every 2 weeks. Don't worry about any of those. They don't matter on a deload. The purpose of a deload is to just give a little bit of stimulation to every muscle to maintain your movement patterns and then let your body recover and catch up from all the previous pushing that you've done, so it can go ahead and adapt to all of it. All your muscles can restructure themselves, they can grow, they can adapt, you can get bigger, you can get stronger. And your connective tissue can heal. And it really is that simple, guys. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.